wondered if I could start with an 8th child, though, having died from Strep A. Suggestions from one of your health ministers, Lord Markham, that if there's an outbreak of Strep A in a class, then all those kids should get antibiotics. Is that something that you're going to do?
Well, it is a tragic for the parents of those 8 children who've lost their child due to this bacteria. And what the UK Health and Security Agency are doing is they're working closely with the schools involved and giving very specific advice to those schools, which may involve use of penicillin and so on. And they'll have more to say about that. And they're providing more general advice to parents, which is to look out for the symptoms, so sore throat, fever, high temperature, and also a red or raised rash on the skin are symptoms of this invasive Strep A outbreak.
One of the things that is your responsibility as a government is to keep these kids warm at school. Apparently the bills for energy have gone up 300%. What are you doing about it?
Well, a number of things. The Energy Relief Scheme, of course, is helping schools over this coming winter. And today we've also announcing £500 million of capital for schools. So a typical primary school will get £16,000 and a typical secondary school £42,000 to enable them very rapidly to put in place energy-saving measures like LED lighting or better lagging of pipes and better thermostat control to help them bring down their energy costs. And, of course, all this follows a major £2 billion extra funding for schools in the autumn statement, both next year and the year after, in addition to the money that had already been allocated to schools. It's a very good settlement for schools to help them deal with these kinds of pressures.
All 4 major teaching unions are balloting their members about possible strike action. Is this government losing control?
No, not at all. I understand the pressure that teachers and teaching assistants feel that they are under. We're all under pressure because of the cost of living, and we're trying to tackle that. And that's what the autumn statement did. It brought in a range of measures to help with the cost of living. Teachers' pay is determined by an independent pay review body, and this year, for this September, they were awarded a 5% increase across the board. But for young teachers coming into the profession the first year, it's an 8.9% pay settlement. We think
that below inflation, though, isn't it?
Well, strike action is not the answer to dealing with these negotiations. And children have already had a disrupted time during COVID. I think the last thing children need in our schools is for teachers to take strike action. I would urge them to continue talking, continue discussing. And, of course, it's the independent pay review body that will determine the pay for next year, and they have for this year.
It's not just schools, though, is it? I mean, we've seen the RMT again are now saying that they're going to strike over Christmas, from Christmas Eve to the day after Boxing Day. Your colleague Mark Harper hasn't got a grip on this either.
Well, he's urging the parties to get together. He's facilitating those discussions. But look, the RMT is a very disappointing decision. They've been offered by the employers 8% rise over 2 years. If you look at the pay settlements
below inflation.
But if you look at the pay settlements outside the public sector, they are generally in the 4 to 6% pay range. We simply cannot afford to pay the kind of pay demands that the unions like the RMT are paying. If all the unions' demands in the public sector were agreed, we'd be paying an extra £28 billion on the payroll. It's simply not affordable. We have to tackle the inflationary pressures in our economy. That's what we're seeking to do. That's what the autumn statement was all about. As well as introducing measures to help people with those cost of living increases, we also have to tackle inflation. That's what's causing households to pay higher bills. And these sorts of pay demands of 19% and so on are just not affordable in the public sector or indeed in the private sector. We just need the unions to work with their employers and not to hold the country to ransom.
Collective union action brings down governments.
Well, we are negotiating with the unions. We're talking to the teaching unions and the leadership unions, and Mark Harper is facilitating those discussions with the RMT.
Nowhere it would appear.
But I think the public will not smile upon the RMT if they start disrupting train travel in the run-up to Christmas. It's a very cold time of year, as we know from the news about today's temperatures. But to do so in the run-up to Christmas, I think, is unacceptable. And you cannot have negotiations over pay while holding the country to ransom. Okay. We do understand the pressures, the cost of living pressures that people are facing, and that's what we sought to help deal with in the autumn statement that we had a few weeks ago.
OK, talk to me about the U-turn on housing. Your 2019 manifesto pledged to build 300,000 new homes a year. Why is the Prime Minister now changing his tune?
And we are committed to that. We want young people, and not so young people, to be able to get on the housing ladder. The Conservative Party, it's in our DNA for young people, for people to have their own home, to the property-owning democracy is part of what we stand for,
Yeah,
and we are committed to that. It's not a U-turn. You need to work with parliamentarians. They represent people and their communities. We want there to be community consent to building more houses. That's how you deliver these targets of hundreds of thousands of new homes every year, to make sure that when you make decisions about where houses are going to be built...
so it's not a U-turn?
No, it's working with parliamentarians.
Okay. Is this a U-turn? Is this a U-turn? It looks as though the Prime Minister is going to say that onshore wind farms can go ahead.
This is all part of the normal process of taking a bill through Parliament. MPs represent 70
or 80,000 people. He told me in the summer that he was definitely not in favour of it, and now he's changing his mind. That's like 3 months.
The emphasis is on offshore wind. We are one of the world's leading suppliers of offshore wind. Something like 40% of our energy now comes from clean, renewable sources. 99% of solar power.
He told me in August that he would definitely not be in favour of onshore wind.
And as I said, our emphasis is still on offshore wind. But when you take legislation through Parliament, you have to
That's
discuss.
A U-turn.
You use the phrase U-turn. I use the phrase parliamentary democracy. This is the normal process of getting legislation through Parliament.
Why didn't he say that at the time?
You listen to members of Parliament, you talk to members of Parliament as you take measures through.
Why didn't he say that to me then?
The emphasis is still on offshore wind as the source of our wind. It's creating hundreds of thousands of jobs. It's, as I said, 40% of our power now comes from clean, renewable sources.
Why didn't he say it's a parliamentary process? What he said was, no, I am against onshore wind.
What he's said in the summer, what he's saying now, is that the emphasis must be on offshore wind. And that is still the position of the government. But, of course, we'll continue to talk to members of Parliament as we take this legislation through Parliament. And that is how our system has always worked, and it should always work.
Well, I'll have to let my viewers decide if it's a U-turn or not. Final thought before I let you go. Michelle Mone's office saying that she's going to take legal action about some of the claims being made about her company, or was it her company? Certainly she made, it appeared, a lot of money out of MedPro. £29 million, apparently, out of a £203 million contract. That's what the allegation is. These VIP lanes, not going to be great, are they, when we start looking at it?
Well, the issue of Baroness Mone, is under investigation, so it wouldn't be right for me to talk about that. But what I would say is, if you think back to the beginning of this COVID crisis, back in February, March 2020, the country desperately needed PPE in our hospitals. So that's what these issues like the VIP lane was all about, is about making sure that those people that could change their manufacturing processes to produce PPE, but that was the emphasis of the government, saving lives, getting that PPE into hospital. 5 billion pieces of PPE were produced as a consequence, and that did save hundreds of thousands of lives.